Welcome to Happy Times and Places, an attempt to do a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast. I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story nominated by a friend of mine and try to guess what their favourite thing about each episode might be, whilst dropping facts and observations and probably some tedious digressions.
Hello, I'm Tom Curley, or Daren Thomas, or Daren Thomas Curley, depending on where you know me from. I know, confusing, isn't it? I'm English-born Irishman. I am also a neurodivergent writer with autism and ADHD. So the reason I mention that is that I might take a while to get to what I'm trying to say, and I probably will go off at tangents, but I'll endeavour to do my best, promise. Anyway, thank you, Toby, for allowing me to suggest something which isn't just any old story for me, a Doctor Who story. This has stayed with me over the years. It's probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time.
Hello, everyone. This has been good, hasn't it? Oh, I hope so. I hope it's been good where you are. I know the great drawback, well, there are many great drawbacks with these podcasts, notably that there's one voice you hear and it's all mine. But let's not delve too deeply into that. But yes, after the good start of having some variety, i.e. somebody else, in this case, and for the last time, Daren Thomas, choosing his outlining his choice of the deadly assassin, which we've both been having fun with. We'll hear from Daren again at the end when he chooses his favourite thing for episode 4 and his bonus favourite thing. As it stands, he's 2-1 up, so I could still win this if I guess both of his things. That's highly unlikely. That's more likely than your leading man assassinating the president of his home planet at the beginning of a story and there being no rational explanation for it, and that he's just done it. But yes, these have been enjoyable for me to do. But I know that a lot of people listen to Doctor Who podcasts because they want to hear people going, I didn't like this, or this was terrible, because that's what we do as fans, isn't it? There's a shared venting about the things about the series that we love that frustrate us, because we need that sort of valve to let off the steam. And that's only because we love Doctor Who so much. The things that we don't like about it vex us so that we need to take the pain away by talking about them and shouting about them, and in the modern era, tweeting about them and Facebooking about them and podcasting about them. But that's not what we do here. I have given myself a restriction in that I must confine myself, where possible, to the positive. It's an attempt to give a bit of variety to what else is out there. I hope it means it doesn't get too one note, and sometimes it means it's an exercise in mental gymnastics for me, or and sometimes of spent effort, but not with the Deadly Assassin, not with season 14. I was wondering if season 14 is my favourite. I think the most consistent and brilliant season of all of Classic Who. Yeah, maybe 13 is close. Actually, 7 is very good as well, even though I am much more of a Tom Baker, Holmes and Hinchliffe fan than I am a Pertwee era fan. Season 7 I love, but we'll talk about season 7 at other times. But also I know that season 7 I love because it's an exception rather than a rule. We'll talk about that when we talk about season 7. I would direct you to the Ambassadors of Death commentary I did recently, where I seem to have plenty to talk about in that regard and thoroughly enjoyed doing so. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking about the Deadly Assassin, partially because I've been able to bring in some of the comments from the listeners who've been watching along, because I haven't done this all in one go, which means I can go back to episode 2, because Richard Straw points out something very important. Richard says, no mention for the greatest moment in this story in my commentary of episode 2, if not of all Who, the chalk outline of the president, complete with colour. I forgive the omission, says Richard, as frankly the sheer joy of these podcasts is infectious. Well, that's very kind, Richard. Yes, the chalk outline is one of those things that is a lovely piece of attention to detail, but is it absurd or is it brilliant? Or is it brilliant because it's absurd? I don't know. You don't really get chalk outlines anymore, do you, in dramas? I suppose CSI has taught us we have to leave everything there and get everything we possibly can. But yeah, the chalk outline was very much a stock visual of crime dramas when I was growing up, where the body had been, they'd drawn a chalk outline so that detectives could picture what had gone on, and forensics and all of that sort of stuff. They seem to have the winds of time seem to have blown chalk outlines away. And unfortunately, the winds of time mean that anybody's thoughts on episode 4 of The Deadly Assassin will not be aired in Happy Times and Places, because this is it. So whatever the listeners, these are listeners, everyone on Patreon who get the chance to comment sometimes if I've been doing the story, with breaks in between the episodes, and I think it's nice to hear from them. And so the comments on episode 3. Are worth reading out because they give us stuff to ponder and talk about. David Trainier says, another entertaining podcast, Toby. I rather like the added listener feedback section, even if Nev Fountain appears to have sewn it up. Yes, do tune in last week for Nev's absolute clarity on Doctor Who / Gallifreyan timelines, which is not a version any of us had heard before, but Nev's seems pretty happy with it. I always loved the Deadly Assassin, says David, while still being able to recognise the reasons others find it troubling. In fact, I rather sympathise with the perceived diminution of the Time Lords and banalisation of the Doctor's origins. Diminution and banalisation, rather lovely words there, David. Although it's not nearly so bad as having him brought up in a barn. Oh, catty, David. I might have felt the same had I not been born a mere 8 months before broadcast. And thank you for the revelation that the iPlayer version is the bowdlerised White House cut. I assumed it would be the Blu-ray version, and it seems incongruous to me that the blue-rinsed old harpy's claws have reached so far into the next century. I would love to say that is malfeasance, but I suspect it's probably just somebody getting off what was on the shelf. I don't think... You would think, wouldn't you, in this day and age, with all the attention to detail that goes into the presentation of stuff, and how many Doctor Who fans work in things, and how cared for and curated Doctor Who is, that mistakes still happen, and some of the mistakes that, when one is one step away from the process, goes, how on earth did that get through? Well, cause things just do, because it's a big old machine, and it only takes one person to press the wrong button or do the wrong thing, and there it is to stay. And you can check and double check and probably not realise until somebody points it out, and then it's glaringly obvious, and it's glaringly obvious to us as soon as we see it, isn't it? I mean, it's also, I think, glaringly obvious that episode 2 of The Reign of Terror sounds like it's been played underwater and looks like it's been trodden on by a herd of gazelles. But there we go. Guy Lambert says, I think I'd refer to the over-the-top violence of modern shows like The Boys. I think violence like The Boys is fine, says Guy, because it's mostly absurd, theatrical gore more than anything anyone can copy. The joy is in the horrific spectacle. Weirdly, I'd say that the strangulation scene here is worse than anything I can remember seeing in the show, because people can easily copy it. Was there a case where a child did emulate it with a friend? I feel like someone made that claim. Anyway, great stuff as always, Mr. H. It is interesting. That does ring a bell. I think it might have been the person who contacted Mary Whitehouse, which is why she fixated upon this episode in particular, had said that a child said to a parent, "Oh, I'm going to hold my brother's head underwater like that chap did in Doctor Who," whatever. And that was the genesis of the whole brouhaha vis-a-vis The Deadly Assassin. The most adult episode of the classic run, says Anthony Carroll. David Gillespie Pratt says just finished parts 3 and 4, and the husband's main takeaway is that he kept being distracted by Angus Mackay's blinking, and now I can't not see it. Oh, well, I'll have that to look at now, David. Thank you. Dev Fountain back again, having, according to our earlier correspondent, David has already sewn it up. But Nev says, here's an interesting observation. The Deadly Assassin occurs at the exact midpoint of Classic Who, almost to the day, an apt position for a story that revamps the Doctor's past and also reshapes the way future stories are told. I don't think Deadly Assassin is the same as the other significant stories that tear up the rule books. I would argue that the Deadly Assassin is forgiven its transgressions because it wrings every drop of drama out of the new things it creates. Everything is done in service to the story. It's a stark contrast to other canon-shattering stories like The Ultimate Foe and The Timeless Child. Those are also stories with the potential to make their mark, but as soon as their narratives get anywhere near something resembling drama, they jog off in the opposite direction, and we're left with a big so what at the end. We keep revisiting The Deadly Assassin like we keep coming back to Genesis of the Daleks, another story that rips up old continuity, not for the sake of it, but in order to make really, really, really good drama. I think that's a good point, Nev. I mean, The Timeless Child behaves like a big revelation, doesn't it? But it's actually the Doctor remains essentially tied up whilst being told it, and we get a sort of we get told it all in a rather sort of drony, they say, flashback full of people we don't know who are played by supporting artists. And at the end, the Doctor says, "It hasn't changed me," and it doesn't really go anywhere. So it's whereas. In Deadly Assassin and Genesis, these revelations are there because that's what the writer came up with in order to tell the story that they wanted to tell, rather than it be the be-all and the end-all of the story and the bells and whistles of it. I think that is a very, very good point. Chris Williams, watching this again, it strikes me as if this is a great example of how the Doctor is a bit of do as I say, not do as I do, hypocrite. He spends the next year telling Leela off for blowing poisonous thorns at people, and what's he doing here? Blowing poisonous thorns at poor old Goth. Yeah, but it's an imaginary, computerised matrix poison thorn, Chris Williams. I wish they'd kept the shimmering makeup on the Time Lords in subsequent Gallifrey stories. It really sells the idea of a preserved and gilded aristocratic society. Nice, that's a nice observation. Same with the sets and that wonderful atmospheric uplighting. Arc of Infinity looks like a John Lewis showroom by comparison. Oh, I'm so looking forward to doing Arc of Infinity. It is one of the worst designed stories in the whole of Doctor Who. I shall have fun with its cross-arch staging and space cushions. A quick odd question about the final shot of the Master escaping at the end of the story. His overlaid face looks odd and doesn't seem to completely match the mask. It even seems to have lips. I wonder if the intention was that he was regenerating or healing. Anyone know? Yes, Chris, I think that was the intention. I think, he has been, spoilers, well, yikes. He has been exposed to the energy of the Eye of Harmony and had returned to Gallifrey in order to cease to be the walking cadaver that he has been reduced to. And so as a result, when we see him on his way, yes, he's getting better. He's regenerating slightly, which obviously is then slightly contradicted in Keeper of Traken, but not so much because I suppose he's got his eyes are better and his mouth moves. So that's what he got from being in the Eye of Harmony. I do actually have the camera script for Episode 4 of The Deadly Assassin here, and it actually, the script has Spandrel saying, "Out into the universe, and do you know, I have a feeling it isn't big enough for the two of them. Fade to black, closing titles." Well, actually, it doesn't say that. It says fade to black, and then it says, "We thank the High Court of Time Lords and the Keeper of the Records, Gallifrey, for their help and cooperation." So he obviously, wanted, like they thank, the Royal Navy or Ironbridge Gorge Museum or whatever. He wanted a BBC official thank you to the High Court of Time Lords and the Keeper of Records on Gallifrey. Witty Robert Holmes. I'm afraid he didn't get his wish, but added in pen, it's close up of the clock with Master's face laughing. It dematerializes, start sig tune. So it doesn't actually say on the camera script that the Master should be being repaired, but I'm pretty sure that is the intention. They wouldn't have gone to that. It's not a mistake. That has been deliberately wrought in that manner. My reading is that he's been successful in what he tried to do, which is why he survived. It didn't only save his life; it helped him partially at least, or regenerate himself, or begin that process. John Deere says, hello John, I have forgiven the shitty spider. This is episode 3, which is obviously on a fishing rod. It even clicks, for God's sake. Oh, I would have, he says, sorry, forgiven the spider, which is obviously on a fishing rod. It even clicks, for God's sake, if they'd panned up and Goth's there holding the rod and winks at the camera. Cowards. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that would have been bold, wouldn't it? And Nick Mellish says, for all the first 3 episodes shift things lore-wise, it's part 4. Oh, this is timely, Nick. Thanks, because that's what we're about to watch, where the big hitters really stand. Tercerus, the Eye of Harmony, and, of course, the regeneration limit. All info dumped and delivered with the same lack of importance as Gallifrey's name dropped in The Time Warrior. Maybe that's why it works, because they don't shine a spotlight on it. And I think you're right, in the same way that, you know, it's Holmes's world building, like, you know, Schlangy in the Rebus operation, or Findecker's experiments, or the Filipinas army's march on Reykjavik. It's all noises off, but so brilliantly fluted they are. And yes, they then become woven into the fabric of the show, but they're not there just for their own sake. They're there, they do a different job, and you know, they've then been promoted, as it were. And I think that's very true, in that shows die if they get too heavy into sort of paying lip service to creating lore, or to lore that's gone on, or whatever. You're telling a story, and if some of that stuff comes up in your telling of the story, then that is fine, especially if your story is good and compelling and exciting. And I think we'll find, as we go back to iPlayer, because this is a complete episode on BBC iPlayer, so I don't have to hook up physical media into physical media into physical media. And so I'm just going to press play as I bring The Deadly Assassin to a conclusion with part 4 that you're going to watch along with me now, and then we'll get Daren Thomas's thoughts on his favourite thing about it and his favourite thing as a bonus about the whole story. Well, it doesn't have to be about the whole story, just a bonus other thing that he likes about The Deadly Assassin. Let's see what we choose. The Hinchliffe and Holmes era, you know, I have to acknowledge, don't always get part 4s right. So let's see what happens now, as we will neither flux nor wither nor change our state for the next 24 minutes as we enjoy the heck out of The Deadly Assassin Part 4 in 3, 2, 1. So yes, I mean, I've alluded to this. I've always, I ponder on part 4s in the Hinchliffe and Holmes era not being great, because Russell T Davies gets stick sometimes for his endings. And also I adore Hinchliffe and Holmes, so why do I forgive them? So when there's something that this is not something I've had to dig to sort of make work as a theory. There's a lot of part 4s that aren't particularly successful, and yet I think it's the solidity of the productions, the seriousness of the show, that seriousness without it being dull, without it being worthy. Robert Holmes is a very funny writer. Tom Baker is a very funny man, but a bit like the law. He calls him a spineless poltroon here. There are some people that think he's being called a very rude word there. Artron energy. There we go. It's all of this stuff. But yeah, Holmes is funny. Tom Baker is funny. But the humour, like the law, is there to serve the story. It's not there for its own sake. And again, that's good writing. It does look good as it's pretty grim, isn't it? It's I mean, Goth essentially gets burnt to death there. And they're now wiping episodes of Gallifrey history. It's the coordinator Engin and Castellan Spandrel there being the Pamela Nash of Gallifrey by allowing the mass wipings of Time Lord minds. There's a thing about wiping memories on Gallifrey, isn't there? Because of course Jamie and Zoe had their memories wiped. Fiend is a is a tricky word, isn't it? It's a word that hasn't dated well. Ah, look, and even with this, it's a needle. It's a sharp needle. It's something, something that you can feel. You know, you can. Why have a space needle when you can have the actual thing? But yes, losing memories in Gallifrey is definitely a thing. But of course, if you have to then rewrite history, that becomes all into the politics of it anyway. So it's not just about wanton destruction. Anyway, yes, fiend is a word that is used a few times in Doctor Who of this period. Harrison Chase calls us animal fiends, and fiend has become a bit of a cliche of sort of old-fashioned name calling. There's a picture of this in Doctor Who: A Celebration, and I remember rushing to it and trying to work out which was Spandrel and which was Engin, because I saw George Pravda's name on the credits of Thunderball when it was on one Christmas at around the time that I'd got this. So many of those pictures with with the credits of the guest actors and stuff were things I looked at over and over again to try and work out who was who and help me envisage the characters. This is all beautifully done, isn't it? These these sets are fairly straightforward, all straight lines, but you do get the sense that you're underground, the green lighting. And here's an interesting sort of development that we perhaps weren't expecting. The Masters look like he's dead, so it seems an odd beat to us, doesn't it, as a piece of storytelling, because we know that there's a lot of story left to go, and the two main villains are gone. So what's going to happen now? It does always sort of slightly surprise me, this. Half of me expects the Master to have buggered off, but in fact, yeah, so here Goth just turns out that he knew he wasn't going to be president. That was pretty silly of the president to tell him, well, no, it's fine. So here's, the plot is fairly straightforward, isn't it? And Tercerus, of course, comes back because it's again, here it's just supposed to be a throwaway comment, but it's become a place that has been invoked, and importantly so, quite a lot ever since. Ditto Artron Energy, and yet when Robert Holmes was writing them, he just wanted to give something a name, and of course doesn't feel the need to explain it. Goth doesn't say Tercerus, that place where X, Y, and Z happens, because it's not important. It's again all down to his economy and his world building. I think these scenes are quite difficult to do, because you have to get Goth sort of say give his reason, which is a pretty he wasn't going to become president, and still show a bit of contrition and tell you everything you need to know. And it's a bit on the nose, but it's saved by the Doctor being quite mean. Goth dies, and there's none of this, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He says, typical politician, no simple answer to a straight question. But this is, of course, in keeping with the whole setup of the society that we're within. We must adjust the truth, and it comes to its to its sort of apex here. Where, well, no, it doesn't actually. Yeah, it does. Where Cardinal Barusa, who is a man of great manners and great diction, and as has been pointed out by David Gillespie Pratt and his husband, a lot of blinking. I wonder if he's doing Morse code to tell the viewer that this sort of thing is beneath him. But yes, he's really blinky, and I can't not see it now. I'll have to see what he's like in Mordrin Undead. Does the headmaster in Mordrin Undead blink a lot? I think he was a bespectacled fellow, Mackay. He's got wonderful dignity. He's got a rather wonderful sardonic delivery. He's sort of like Noel Coward in space, isn't he? But I love this cynical take on on politics, and I like Tom Baker absolutely having the measure of this. And you know, he does the thing. You know, he shows respect, and he doesn't call anybody names, but he you know, he's got their number, and he says it to them in a way that is acceptable. Verisimilitude is a word that is used here. And yeah, so they're basically rewriting history. It's fake news here on Gallifrey, although I think where this is I think more interesting and effective is that we have I think it's sad that we've lost it in today's politics, even though it's truly hypocritical. We have the veneer of respectability under which we kind of know that stuff goes on, but and perhaps politics today is slightly more honest, is that nobody even needs to pretend to be honest anymore. But I think we lose something if we're an entirely, if our cynicism and our doubt is, and of course now everybody sees fakery even where there is none these days, and I don't think that does any favour, because it gives oxygen to the lunatics. See our poor old Hilrid, who thinks just sort of winding up his latest case, and Castellan Spandrel says, yeah, we got a job now well within your capabilities. You're going to go and staser a corpse. I think you can tell that Tom Baker likes Eric Chitty, and I like the Doctor's relationship with Engen. Oh, look, they're having a drink. Oh, I've got a cup of tea. Hang on. Oh, the drink gives it, as Barusa says, verisimilitude. There's so many beautiful lines. But yeah, two people having a chat about what's just happened over a drink. And this helps the Doctor works out what has happened, but it's odd, isn't it? It's quite talky at the moment for a final episode. Because we're supposed to think that the story is over, and you know, the characters and the acting and the dialogue is so good that I don't think it matters. But I think it's interesting structurally that we do have all of this. I love this music. Dudley Simpson's organy, Time Lordy stuff. It does seem to be evoking, you know, the great gods of the past. And Tom Baker sort of undercuts that by going, "Oh, my hair's curling," or "I'm onto something." I love all of that. So, yeah, see, he's quite a spiky old Castellan Spandrel. I do. I really like George Pravda in this, even though perhaps I shouldn't. And I can understand. I've said this before. I've understood people do, but I think he actually he's playing the character well. There are a couple of lines in this episode where you go, okay, love, I think we need to have another go at that. But they're both actually quite difficult lines, and I'm sure we'll come to them. I love this where Enkin's talking and the Doctor's sort of being a bit, yeah, I'm being polite to you, but can you get a move on? I love that interaction. I think it's beautiful. And here we have Helen Blatch, who was uncredited in episode 1, but she's credited here as voice, which left her up until just a few years ago as the last surviving credited cast member of the Deadly Assassin. But sadly she died on a sort of, it was missed slightly because it was on a December the 30th or New Year's Eve, so we didn't find out till a bit later. Turns out she was actually with my agent at the time. But she is, of course, Fabian in the Twin Dilemma. May her bones rot for being so. But Helen Blatch had a long career and did all sorts, but was brought in to be the voice here. But yeah, we do get to see her face. And another sort of key moment story, the Twin Dilemma, and only in one episode, in episode 1. Tom Baker is so good at this. What a stupendous egotist. There's such great lines. And so all of this sort of Time Lord ceremony is actually housing something that does have genuine power. And I love the fact that the Doctor knows what this is, and it's got a proper medical sounding name. And Baker working out what's going on. He's realised that something is wrong, and I think Tom Baker is the perfect doctor for this sort of stuff. And it means that actually the joke of, notice the president's got a cloth on his face because then you don't have to rehire Llewellyn Rhys to be a body in a morgue. That's very, very handy. But look, the Master as cadaver is now a cadaver in a morgue. I think this looks brilliant. Such a great visual. But the joke you have of Hilrid, who's been patronised all the way through, has been sent to do a job, in inverted commas, well within your capability, which is to staser a corpse. And this is actually sadly how he meets his end, because he goes to do it, and in the Super Channel version of this that I watched, that's really terrifying. That's a corpse coming back to life. He's killed Hilrid, which is really sad, because you've got this sort of slightly comic character, this sort of hapless god, although, as I said, Derek Seaton wisely doesn't play it for laughs. And poor old Hilrid, who doesn't really do much wrong. I suppose he's a bit, he enjoys the torture a little bit too much, doesn't he, in episode 2. But poor old Hilrid has been turned what we would now come to know as the tissue compression eliminator, but we don't see any of that going on. Now, one of the criticisms that this came in for in some of the stuff I've been listening to recently is that poor old Peter Pratt can't do that much with his vocal performance because he's speaking through the mask, and seeing as he was somebody renowned for his voice because he was an opera singer, wasn't he, as much as anything else, or certainly he was a vocalist singer. I think he does have a sort of creepy, beyond death kind of voice, and I think he does a good job vocally, and I think he's not done in post sync, which is it's not done in ADR, which I you can always spot, and it always takes us away from it a little bit. And look, in this lighting, I love this lighting. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I think the Master does look really good. And I love a ray gun. It's quite like a Star Wars gun. And I remember being really shocked when that happened. And it's and it shows that it's pretty hefty stuff that the Doctor doesn't even give Spandrel a second glance. But even though I'd read the book and I know Spandrel survived, at this moment, you think Spandrel's been killed, and it's like, what, really? And now, the Doctor's been shot, so now you go, okay, I know they're not dead. A bit like when Kate Lethbridge Stewart melted at the start of Empire of Death, you go, well, they're not dead, so that's I'm not wild about this bit where he says, "Oh, you'll get the same." It's a bit, and also, what can you do with they're not dead, stunned? I mean, in the sort of cliche-ometer. I mean, yeah, the Master kind of goes, well, the reason I'm doing this is so that the Doctor can taste the full bitterness of defeat. But it is a bit, would you really go, well, I'm going to having killed the commander of the Gallifreyan Guards, I'm now going to set my laser beam to stun just in case the Doctor walks in, so that then when I shoot the Castellan, I don't kill him because I'll have been set on stun, because I might need to stun the Doctor because he needs to really taste his defeat. His defeat needs to be like orange juice after a toothbrushing. But all this stuff about neither flux nor wither nor change their state, and the fact that the myth actually is built upon a scientific reality which explains why the Time Lords are perhaps more powerful than anybody else. That really works, and it's rather nice that the Time Lords don't actually realise that, because they've gone so up the sort of scholastic and monastic route. They're there with their books and their ceremony and all of this, but they don't actually have access to the scientific reality that's the core of their power. I quite like that, because that then does sort of tie it in a little bit with religion, because it dates back to so long that there's nobody alive that really knows the sort of reality of what occurred. I like the way he does the stuff with the the staff there. I think that's really nice. That it's a key, isn't it? That it has to be done, twisted and turned in certain different ways. This music by Simpson is excellent. Dudley Simpson's music is often very good. Oh, and lovely piece of lighting as well. But it very rarely has bits that I want to sort of write home about, which is probably good. But my taste in incidental music is stuff that I can sort of listen to instead of pop. And there's very little of Simpsons that I can do that with. But I really love what that recurring organ theme does, in that it invokes the majesty and history of Gallifrey, and it really helps the story to feel like it does feel sort of like a season finale, even though it isn't one. I mean, that's how good a season is. It's got a series of it's got a number of stories that could be season finales. And I know they did a clever cut, didn't they, to have after the opening of this hatch, so that it could look like this has risen from beneath it. It's very cleverly done, and but yes, the climactic episode has no film in it whatsoever. So I think it probably just does feel like, even though the action is on a larger scale, this is the destruction of Gallifrey. This is the invocation and resurrection of Rassilon's power. It doesn't help that George Pravda goes with as little excitement as possible, if the Doctor is right, that the end of the world is approaching. And that is a line I have heard recently be criticised for its flatness, and I don't have much of a defence other than to say perhaps he's trying to underplay it. I think the discontinuity guide said that the master here says Rassilon's power, and it makes him sound Welsh. It sounds like he's going, Rassilon's power, oh boy, but he's not. He's saying all mine. The dreaded polystyrene noise of the falling rocks. Although that bit of sort of camera work and the refracting light and all of that, and the almost the sort of handheld style of the camera work there is pretty bold for this time, and in a studio in a tiny set. And that's the issue, I think, is that that they've used all their film on going outside for imaginary world hijinks, and absolutely to great effect. But it does mean that the potential destruction of the most powerful race in the universe and the Doctor's home planet and all of that happens with wobbly cameras and polystyrene rocks and a bit of shaky camera. But it's well done. I think the studio lighting is excellent. Judicious use of dry ice. Bit of a fight here that's effectively done. I mean, Maloney is so good in the studio. It there's a real sense of scale about this stuff, and well done, Roger Murray Leach, for having a set that enables you to have this height and this depth. Actually, it's a set that goes back as well as up. So they've really made the most of the space that they've got here. It really is the dream team, and that master costume is fabulous. Well done here. They've got the floor opening up. That was always quite a thing in sort of earthquake dramas and things like that. I always think the angle of his arms is a bit funny here, because I think it's supposed to be suggesting that he's sort of hanging down, but you can see it sort of curling round because the actor's lying down. But that's just a thing. It doesn't matter. But I always think, if one were to do that sort of properly, as it were, without the restrictions of safety and actors and studio and height and all of that, I think you'd have his arms at a different angle, so it looked like he was being pulled down and clinging on to dear life, rather than sort of curling round because he's lying on the floor. But that's I think that's just a me thing that I spotted the first time, and now can't not see, much like I will now never not see Blinkety 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 Mackay, whose diaries I've been going through. I think I mentioned subsidence, so we're playing to advise. I tried to quote this line in the very first performance of Moth's my Doctor Who scarf. You shall never amount to anything in the universe while you retain your propensity for vulgar facetiousness. And I couldn't get it out in the heat of the performance, and was sort of pointing out that's why it's such good lad. And I like the fact that even though Barusa is condescending and the Doctor is kind of, sees through him, there's actually a mutual respect there, and I sort of like that as well. That the Doctor knows that there's hypocrisy there, but he also respects the station and he respects the reason for it, and he can be a bit of an anarchist because they're part of a civilized society and there's checks and balances. And Barusa respects that as well. He knows that the Doctor's a ne'er-do-well and undermines, their decorum and the way that they do things. But he also is wise enough to know that a functioning society needs those as well. And that's sort of how societies work. We know that there are things we disagree with, or that there are hypocrisies, but actually we have our own as well, and that we rub along together because we counteract each other's foibles or flaws. Look, the Master. I mean, that's a hard line to do anyway, so he just says it. I love the way Tom Baker says, "Oh, goodbye, Engin." And here, you can definitely see that. The Master has sort of slightly improved, and we see that clock again, don't we? The mutual respect between. Oh, and Spandrel, George Proud to get second billing between Barusa and the Doctor is an important grace note to the whole thing. But all of that Barusa dialogue is wonderful, isn't it? It's absolutely wonderful. All of those brilliant lines, and the sort of the political stuff is done with a real sort of caustic view of how politics works. But again, without being, it's not sort of mindless thuggery in terms of, how it treats, institutions. Institutions are rife with hypocrisies and problems, but actually a society needs sort of structure, and it needs a veneer of civilization in order to, separate us from the animals in a way. So even though it comes up with all sorts of problems, the way to deal with them is to prick pomposity, but also, remain dignified at all times. I love all of that stuff. I think Barusa's dialogue is gorgeous. Yeah, it's a fine episode. I mean, I think it does sort of peak a little bit with episode 3, and then the first 10 minutes or so of that episode very much seem to be like a post-mortem until the Master resurrects himself and does what his real plan is, and that plan makes sense. And I think there's subtext in the idea that the Time Lords are sitting on all of this enormous power, but they've disappeared so far up their own fundaments that they don't actually realize just what it is, and it's reimagining of the Time Lords, I think, is fertile ground. I think it lays the way for great characters and great dialogue, and it facilitates a story that is thrilling and exciting, but also feels, it feels like this, as Nev pointed out, it's halfway through the classic series life, and it feels like it's a show that has an understanding of its own history, but also of its own future. And I mean, like anything, like bringing Doctors together, I think you should only go back to the planet Gallifrey if you've got a heck of an amazing story to tell. And and of course everyone thinks they're good, I'm sure, but it seems to me that we return to Gallifrey with diminishing returns in the classic series, which means that what Holmes has done here can be seen as less forgivable because it leads to that wonderful word that was used by a correspondent before, the banalization, to make banal of the Doctor's origins. But actually, it makes more sense of his character that this is what he was running away from. Whereas the mystery, yeah, I understand that. But we already knew they were Time Lords, and the only way that they were mysterious was because they wore robes and went, ooh, and that can be quite boring, if they were just going to pop in and but be godlike, and actually they weren't being anyway, because we'd got the city gent in Terror of the Autons, and the ones sitting around in Colony and Space, yeah, they were controlling events, but they weren't mind manipulating psycho gods. They were just sort of three guys in admin in robes, and the ones in the Three Doctors are, again, they're in a sort of they're in a control room and quite hammy and declamatory, and they've got space paper, but so the Time Lords had already got sort of uninteresting after their initial amazing, impactful first appearance. So the only way to go with them was to do something that undermined their importance. And it doesn't just do it for the sake of it; it does it to facilitate a really interesting story. And I think, as I say, I gave it the points a couple of weeks ago. The depiction of Gallifrey, I think, is one of the real pluses of this particular story. So, what have I got to choose for episode 4 and for my bonus thing? I would like to choose Simpsons music. That organ. But I also really like the words. Words. I love the vocabulary that Robert Holmes brings to Doctor Who. Even lines like "the application is frivolous" in episode 2, a terse, pithy line that nonetheless makes a nod towards procedure and intelligence, and but is helpful for the script and the storytelling. The way that Holmes paints pictures off screen purely through dialogue, but then all of that beautiful stuff that is great for actors, and so often it's the actors that have to do the work in Doctor Who, because the sets and the special effects are restricted, and the actors fill in the blanks. And if you give actors really good things to say, they're gonna do you a damn good job, and I think the actors do in this. And I think Eric Chitty is beautiful, and I love the fact that Tom Baker sort of loves Engin, and you can tell wants him. I'm sure Tom Baker would have preferred Engin as a companion to anybody else if the cabbage was unavailable, or banned. Tom Baker does like delightful old people. Oh, goodbye, Engin. I love Oh, goodbye, Engin. But as I say, I think he's not annoyed with Pravda, which is interesting, because I think if George Pravda was giving a performance that Tom Baker thought was a bit flat or a bit below par, I think they wouldn't have had that sort of mutual respect thing going on that Spandrel and the Doctor clearly have. And I really like a lot of that unspoken stuff that Baker does. And he gets a bit naughty later on in his tenure, and actually quite insolent towards his fellow performers. But there's deference here and respect here, which I like, and it's always nice to see actors working together in harmony, and your leading man giving his co-stars space and respect, and I think he does that here. And I forgot to say if I did this in episode 2. So just for the record, yeah, Eric Chitty dies not long after this, sadly, bless him, and then Derek Seaton dies a couple of years later. Dies just 1979, but yeah, they weren't alive by the decade's end, which I think is very sad. Which, as I say, was the start of The Deadly Assassin becoming the story that, as I record this, is the only story where the entire cast, bar the Doctor, is no longer with us. Tom Baker is the only survivor, the last survivor of The Deadly Assassin. So I do love the words, but watching it this time, that music kept creeping up on me. And you see, my bonus thing, I wanted my bonus thing to be the dream team: Hinchliffe, Holmes, Murray Leach, Maloney, Baker. That's a dream team. That, to me, is the acme of classic Doctor Who. Those names on your production mean you're going to get pretty much everything that you need to tell a Doctor Who story that is excellent. And, you know, we sometimes get some, but not all of those people. But what it means is that even if there's a shortcoming to the story, I don't think anyone's a huge fan of Planet of Evil, apart from me. I love Planet of Evil, but it takes a battering these days. But I think even its critics sort of go, but it's you know, the planet's great, Tom Baker's great, David Maloney's great, you know. You know, that the ingredients that those people supply are always top notch, and I think they really all come together here in a way that is emblematic of the whole period, and the fact that they do so in a story set on an alien planet, which is always harder to realise, even though, you know, the Matrix stuff is an Earth type setting, but nonetheless they augment it with nightmarish surrealism. So well done. It helps to give it a different dimension. I wanna herald those. I wanna hold those people up on high and go, these are the dream team. These are the Avengers. I'm assembling the Avengers of classic Who. There's not 7 of them, though, is there? So otherwise I could have carried on the boys analogy that was started an episode or 2 ago. But I don't know if Daren will do that. It was just as I was watching this, I just couldn't escape the fact that those people, and I'll say their names again: Philip Hinchliffe, Robert Holmes, Roger Murray Leach, David Maloney, and, not to be underestimated, Tom Baker, in absolutely fantastic form and the best form of his tenure as the Doctor. Really, I think is seasons 13 and 14, and it's such a great period of the show. I do think, you know, and if 14 isn't the best season, I think the run of Robots of Death, Talons, Weng Chiang, Horror of Fang Rock is probably the only time there's 3 10 out of 10s in a row for me, story-wise, in the classic series. Some come close, and I'm close to giving Face of Evil a 10 as well. I know that, again, that's one that people aren't as wild about, but I think is a brilliant story. In which and Assassin, which would then give us 5 in a row because of Deadly Assassin. And I like the Hand of Fear. I mean, not as much as the Hamster with the Blunt Penknife did. When no spoilers, but you go listen to that hand, which usually gets a bit of a kicking. Well, yeah, it usually gets a kicking. It usually gets a foot. It actually gets a big one of itself from the Hamster Bunch. But yeah, I'm going to try and play tactically then, because I mean, who cares? You know, I'd love it that in the official annals of Happy Times and Places there was official acknowledgement of the greatness of Philip Hinchliffe, Roger Murray Leach, David Maloney, Tom Baker, and Robert Holmes. But there's not going to be any such things, and the Deadly Assassin shows us that records are all a load of rubbish anyway, that people either don't pay attention to or retcon or make up. And I know, of course, that this is just a disposable podcast, and there's no, you know, anything I say will never be an accolade that's going to go down in anybody's history. So I may as well just try and win the game. And so with that formal acknowledgement of Hinchliffe, the Hinchliffe, Holmes, Maloney, Murray Leach, Baker axis of inventiveness and brilliance and just supreme craftsmanship, and they're firing on all cylinders in this particular story as well. I'd also like to mention the master costume, which actually watching it this time around, in particular in episode 4, particularly when it comes to life again in the morgue, that's a brilliant moment. I hadn't really appreciated as much prior to this that, you know, you've got the dead body in the morgue and the master's been looking like a dead body for the whole thing, for that moment where the dead body comes to life and kills someone. Oh, I mean, that's terrifying. And I bet when you're a kid, that is really sort of gruesome, horrible stuff, and having the master as the Walking Dead is, you know, is a great idea in terms of you know, getting people scurrying behind the sofa. So you know, kudos to that as well, and of course to those brilliant Time Lord robes and collars that have lasted. But I think I'm going to go for episode 4. It's the words. It's Robert Holmes's vocabulary, because what he does with dialogue is economical, it's world building, it's witty, it's dramatic. Words, yes please, and it's a gift for wonderful actors, which this story is full of. And so then for my overall thing, I'm going to give it to Dudley Simpson, notably for that organ music that does all the things I said it does earlier. But I will still always be saluting the flag that has the 5 Olympic ringmasters of Doctor Who in the classic era, of Hinchliffe, Holmes, Murray, Leach, Maloney, and Baker. So, I mean, if Daren now chooses that, I'm going to be furious. But Daren Thomas, my guest, former script editor of Holby City, all-round good egg, he is going to choose his favourite thing for episode 4 and his favourite extra bonus thing. Let's have episode 4 first.
The fourth favourite thing for episode 4, for me, I suppose, is the production design. You could call world building of Gallifrey, the depiction of Gallifrey and Time Lord society, and you finally, you know, you get that chance to see what the Doctor's home world is like, and you know, of course, there's been few glimpses of it now looking back in previous stories, but for me back then that was my first time, as I said before, and it's just superbly done. You know, I love the idea. You know, people, I think fandom, certainly the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, had a problem with how it was depicted, because Robert Holmes rather cleverly subverted what we thought we knew as the Time Lords were kind of depicted as these sort of super gods, almost comic strip like super gods who controlled everything, and Robert gave them that option to have a crumbling, you know, behind the facade of all this super god nonsense, the truth, the bureaucracy, you know, and really subvert all of that so well. It was brilliant, and I think, you know, with that it's so believable that with such great power as they would have had comes all this corruption and the lies and the hidden truths. I think one of the things I know when I was looking at all the things related to the show, the story, in preparation for doing a review, was finding out that actually production design sat right next door to costume, and the two departments worked together to realize this idea. And I think this is why, for me, the sort of division of Gallifrey is everything. It's the robes, I think the interesting thing is the sort of design of the Chancery Guards, the robes of the Time Lords, still look the same in the show now because they were so brilliantly done. I think on the limited budget element of it, from the design point of view, as Roger Murray Leach, the designer, wasn't it? He did a brilliant job because you had all these levels of the panopticon that were cleverly realized through trickery. You had a sort of depth to it because so much of it went to darkness, so you never really knew what was beyond what you could see in the foreground, and it gave it that expanse, and yet it gave it a sort of darkness, a creepiness, and this, you know, crumbling world of crumbling Time Lord society. And what was rather lovely that in the end, you know, you have the Time Lords are all sort of resplendent in their costumes and their high collars with their upright self-importance, and it's kind of hilarious, you know. some of the design elements I noticed, they have a very 1930s Flash Gordon sci-fi feel to them, with the robes, with the colors. There's lots of greens in there. It's very sort of Art Deco-y elements in there, and it's just really, really, for me, brilliantly realized, and what made it so clever. But again, the little cheats with the curtains and the backdrops and the split screen to give the panopticon the height. Genius. David Maloney, obviously, as the director, gets credit for a lot of that as well. But yes, a brilliant depiction for me of Time Lord society.
Well, do you know what? I think I chose that for episode 2. So this gives us a hopefully exciting climax, because I chose it before Daren. That means I get the point for it, even though, of course, I don't get the point. I then don't get. I'm not in a chance of getting the point for the previous episode because he chose something else. So, but what that does mean is that because I chose it before him, because I'm not allowed to choose something after he's chosen it, which is why I have to choose carefully. I'm getting bogged down in this as if anybody cares, but that means we're at 2-all, because I think I chose the depiction of Gallifrey, including the costumes and the set design, because, well, they're both magnificent, and as Daren says, the costumes have continued even to this day, and Murray Leach's set design is so key to the success of this story, and they're both practical and aesthetically superb, in terms of what they allow David Maloney and the actors to do. But yes, and let's mention these great creatives, because they've all done brilliant work. It was suggested, but by Chris, wasn't it, that the Time Lords do have this facial makeup, almost like they're sort of Egyptian corpses that have been sort of painted with gold in order to preserve them. And there's a metaphor there, isn't there? There's a sort of saying that they are mummified, they are preserving the old order, they are archaic, but it's a good look as well. And the makeup is Gene Williams. James Atchison did the costume design, although he walked out. I think there was a bit of a brouhaha there, and Joan Ellicott replaces him. And the studio lighting is Brian Clement, and they all do a fantastic job. So let's mention them, as well as eulogizing the 5 men that I've mentioned an awful lot. And of course, the film cameraman for episode 3 was Fred Hamilton, who was a mighty film cameraman, and I'm sure of great assistance to David Maloney on episode 3. So it's worth mentioning these names that don't always jump out of the credits or are not often invoked, because we tend to concentrate on the headliners or those people who we can actually see, which is usually the actors, although everybody gets credited in a much more prominent way than you do these days. But that's something I've mentioned so much that you'll be wanting me to disappear into a crack in the floor and not emerge from it. So I think we are even Stevens as we go into Daren's final thing. So if he chooses the music, then I've won this one. I mean, it's not going to happen, is it? I won the Sensorites not that long ago. Prior to that, I'd only won Christmas Carol and Love and Monsters, which are slightly easier with modern series because there's 5 things to choose in a 45-minute to an hour-long episode. Whereas here we choose one thing per episode, so we can find to each instalment, and it could be anything. And then the bonus thing can be anything across all 4, or 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. But I've come close a few times, but I succeeded. My first classic series one was with the Sensorites not that long ago. Could success, could it have gone viral? Could Daren now choose something that enables me to celebrate another victory? All mine! And if he chooses the fact that it's got the 5 pillars of wisdom of Doctor Who, and he invokes Hinchliffe, Holmes, Baker, Maloney and Murray Leach, I'm gonna smash everything to pieces.
So I have one more final favourite thing to share beyond one per episode. Very generous of you, Toby. You probably got all of these, I'm sure, because you probably will have picked up on things we've no doubt spoken about, or indeed just generally the same things as me. I hope so, to some degree. Or do I want to win? Is it a competition? My extra point. Let's get to the point. My extra point, my extra love of this story is really its uniqueness. The Deadly Assassin was a very, very different piece of television for Doctor Who. It broke all the sort of story conventions and the norms that we saw week in, week out with Doctor Who that we expected. This was really a sort of sudden jar, how it begins with the rolling commentary to the ideas contained within it. Really quite arrestingly different. And as a result of that, it's a story of firsts. And that's something I think probably over time you probably don't necessarily see anymore. But, it was the first time we see a story, which is just the Doctor by themselves. And it's the first time we properly explore Gallifrey and the Doctor's home world and what that really means. It's the first time we have seen The Matrix, as part of that as well. And the first time, I suppose, we see the Time Lords depicted as anything other than benevolent gods and more bureaucratic, potentially dangerous, power-wielding psychopaths in some cases, certainly untrustworthy, shall we say. And it's interesting because it stands alone in its ideas and it establishes so much in terms of production design, visual effects, concepts, and they're things that still are used, as I said, to this very day. If you see them return to this, you look at Jodie's story back on Gallifrey, a lot of the production design, a lot of the elements there are still very much, even the Time Lord Cybermen are very much borrowing and harking back to the Deadly Assassin's first depiction of that world. So yes, I love just how unusual it is, and I love how it, for a long time, just stood alone as a piece of Doctor Who. As I said, I mentioned before, the fandom itself at the time really hated this particular take on Time Lords and Gallifrey. What's interesting to comment on is this is not just about the Master in his final incarnation, embittered and desperate to create havoc and disrupt things and kill and maim and twist the Doctor into this macabre story that he's setting up. But it's also been set up by Robert Holmes that this is potentially the Doctor's last regeneration. So we now really properly get a sense of jeopardy, because if you think we established the idea in The Brain of Morbius that the Doctor had previous incarnations to his first incarnation that we met. This was an idea that Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchliffe was sort of fun exploring, but having fun to explore. And what they were trying to do was establish that there was, in this story, they then went further to say there was a limit on how many incarnations a Time Lord could have. And if you added up those extra faces we've seen and the incarnations we've had so far, then this Doctor, Tom's Doctor, was on his last legs potentially. And it just made everything so much more dangerous and edgy. So yeah, the jeopardy was felt very real at the time. Of course, history would tell us otherwise, depending on where you stand on Timeless Children and Morbius Doctors and your point of view. But anyway, that's very much my final favorite thing, just the uniqueness that is the Deadly Assassin. Thank you so much for letting me participate in your wonderful podcast. Much love to you and all my fellow Whovians out there. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Daren. It's actually nice to hear your voice, Daren, because we often exchange quite long texts between us, don't we? And you forget, actually, that it's nice to hear somebody speak. I mean, I was close again there, wasn't I? Because I chose of episode 3 that it was episode 3, and that encapsulated the idea of uniqueness. But no, I don't quite win. It is a competition, Daren. You do want to win, but I thought we were pretty simpatico there. I thought we I thought we were in the same ballpark and certainly the same level of appreciation. And then you have to go and ruin it all by evoking the Timeless Children and the Brain of Morbius doctors, with me having gone, oh, Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe are brilliant. And then you go, oh, yeah, and then they did that thing that has caused me all sorts of conniptions, because I very much have in my head that it goes William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, Tom Baker. And now now I can't make columns and lists and I certainly hadn't viewed it as that they were doing that to bring jeopardy to this current incarnation of the Doctor. But that makes absolute sense, and I like that as an observation and as a take. And it's funny, isn't it, how we all have our own individual canon, and how, Daren has taken those scraps of information and conferred them upon his understanding of this story and its place in the show's history and the development of the character in the history of the Doctor. Whereas I'm much more, if a thing happens that I don't really sort of buy, I just ignore it or pretend it was Morbius. I've never seen, even though there's that line where he says, "I'm sending you back right to the beginning," etc. I get it that I interpret it that Morbius hasn't quite realised he's being beaten, and it's actually Morbius we're seeing, and that William Hartnell is the first Doctor, and anything else is very silly. I would then have to think hard about the Timeless Children, because I'm talking now about Brain of Morbius on its own. Now that has been built upon or sort of used as a catalyst to, even though that's not said in the Jodie Whittaker era, but we know that that it served as a catalyst for Chris Chibnall to re-examine what he saw as the genesis of the character. So I would then have to, think about how I decide that the stuff in Fugitive of the Judoon and the Timeless Children is wrong. But that would mean I'd have to think about them in great detail, and I don't want to do that right now. I want to think about The Deadly Assassin, because I love The Deadly Assassin and was having a perfectly nice time with it. Thank you very much. So, and I'm sure we will. Somebody choose The Timeless Children for me, and I think somebody has chosen Fugitive of the Judoon. So we will get onto those, and I will, appreciate them positively in the way that I must. But I don't know that era particularly well, and I look forward to revisiting it, because a lot of those episodes I've only seen, a couple of times, and the beauty being a Doctor Who fan is that I know that there will be a period when I haven't watched an era of the show for a while, and I come back to it and it's fresh, and I see things I'd never seen, and bits that I had worried about turn out to be absolutely fine, and bits that I'd forgotten about turn out to be brilliant. Blah, blah, blah. That's the whole thing of it. This era is slightly different from me, because I never venture too far away from it. I try and keep my powder dry. I try not to overwatch these, because I don't want familiarity to breed contempt. But I've never got bored of the Hinchcliffe era, and as I say, if anything, I have to sometimes go, no, I won't watch Hinchcliffe because that's too obvious. That would always be my default, even though I love other eras and I love other Doctors, and but I think with the Hinchcliffe era, it's not just that I think certain other eras I will watch. I like all of classic Who, for example, now, and a lot of that's to do with nostalgia. It's not to do with objective views of quality or whatever. And there was stuff that I was furious with as a kid, like the McCoy era, that I now really, really like and enjoy. And that's partially to do with the fact that the show's survival is not dependent on them, etc. They are now historical artifacts that I can enjoy, divorced of any impact they might have on the outside world or the future of the show. And it's all sort of brought in with nostalgia as well. But there are certain things that I will watch and I will enjoy because they're for me, and I will enjoy them. But I know I might, deep down, I know that objectively, they're a bit of a stretch for a modern audience, or even by their own standards, they can be a bit naive or clunky or whatever. But I nonetheless still enjoy them, and as I say, I see poetry where other people see, two-dimensional grayscale, because Doctor Who is my thing. But with the Hinchcliffe era, I think the stars align. It's not only what I think of as really, really good Doctor Who done well, where most departments are firing on all cylinders because they've got a producer demanding quietly, professionally. I don't think he was a tyrant, Hinchliffe, just expecting top quality work to be done and making sure that it happened. But also stories that I think hold up and are watchable and are good quality, as well as being, ones that I have great nostalgic memories for as well. I think in and of themselves they are the most consistently high quality products of all of classic Who. Even though sometimes the episode 4s, as I say, can struggle a bit, but actually Deadly Assassin I think works for, and I think it's quite an interesting way of developing the story, of making it seem like we're attending a post-mortem, where actually that's a distraction from the conclusion of the intended plans, and what talky scenes there are just dripping with gorgeous vocabulary and dialogue and wordplay and character through dialogue. Yes, love it. I have thoroughly enjoyed The Deadly Assassin, more so than I thought. Actually, I knew I liked it. I knew I liked it a lot, but I absolutely bloody love it. I think it's a terrific story, a high watermark of Doctor Who, despite the fact that, as I've said, a lot of the things it does, it could easily be criticised for, and could understandably and even rightly be criticised for. But in a way, that's the whole point. Brilliance is more than the sum of its parts. Brilliance is having things that are, that are compromised, and yet they don't spoil the experience as a whole, which is, as a whole, a witty, funny, thrilling, muscular, enjoyable, well-produced, well-acted, led from the front, great atmosphere, just a great tone. The whole tone is so well done throughout. Nobody's being patronised here, audience-wise, even though it's, kids are watching. Yeah, it is quite violent, but nothing grotesque. It's it's again a bit like Hinchliffe himself. It's sort of sensible, grown up, slightly dispassionate view of the realities of jeopardy. Yeah, love it. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I've checked with Daren. He doesn't have anything he wants to plug. He said, no, it's fine. So just if you ever meet him or see him, tell him he's a nice bloke, because he is. And I hope you've enjoyed watching The Deadly Assassin with me. Who's doing my best to make something that you like here, but, I'm full of the knowledge that I will never amount to anything in the galaxy while I retain my propensity for vulgar facetiousness. So, up yours.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
It's not so much an I think you'll find. It's more I think I just want to clear this up for my own peace of mind, which sort of rhymes. I alluded to the fact that The Deadly Assassin is the only Doctor Who story in which only the Doctor survives and all of the guest cast are gone. And I can do that, of course, because it's the only story in which only the Doctor appears and there's no companions. So, I couldn't, there is a cause to say there are stories in which the guest cast are all deceased, but only the regulars survive, or only some and one and or some of the regulars survive. But I sort of got a bit mealy-mouthed as I was doing it, because I suddenly panicked about invoking Tom Baker's mortality, because I don't like doing that, and I don't like it when people say, "Oh, I'm surprised so-and-so's still alive," or what, or at least so-and-so's still with us. I don't want to get into all of that. But anyway, Tom Baker is the sole surviving cast member of The Deadly Assassin, but there are other stories in which all of the guest cast are deceased. But of course, if they're from the 60s, that's, we have a companion at least from each story in the 60s. So whilst Deadly Assassin has only Tom Baker surviving, we also unfortunately have An Unearthly Child only has Carol Ann Ford surviving. All of the guest cast are gone. Obviously, until very recently, the 60s, we had both William Russell and Carol Ann Ford from those early years who helped with the survival rate of the cast of the 60s stories. But Carol Ann Ford still means that the first year has a surviving cast member every story, but An Unearthly Child has no guest actors still alive. Obviously, there are no guest actors in Edge of Destruction. The Aztecs is a puzzling one, because we do not know what happened to David Anderson, even though various internet resources mistake him for the Scottish actor Dave Anderson, who he definitively is not. I've not found David Anderson, and I'm still trying to. So I don't know if he's still alive or not. And Tom Booth, who is the stunt guy who plays the first victim in episode 1, the guy who goes, "You have denied me honour," and jumps off, I don't know what became of him either. All of the other cast are dead. So if those two gentlemen are no longer with us, that means the Aztecs also has no surviving guest cast. It certainly has no surviving traceable cast. The Rescue also has no surviving guest cast, and now only has Maureen O'Brien as a survivor, credited guest cast of The Rescue. I don't know about the two Didonians. Again, there's another mistaken identity there where people think it's the ancient film actor John Stewart who is under heavy makeup and looking like somebody else as extra John Stewart. So don't believe internet resources. And but I don't know what's happened to, I think it's John Stewart and Colin Hughes, who are the two non-speaking residents of Dido, but they're not credited cast members. We also have no cast from no surviving guest cast from Power of the Daleks, which leads us to the interesting prospect that actually Power of the Daleks is the first story to have an episode with no surviving cast members, because Annika Wills, the only surviving cast member, credited cast member, because I know Nick Evans did some Dalek work on it, Annika Wills has a week off, and so the episode of Power of the Daleks in which Annika Wills has a week off is the first episode of Doctor Who that sadly now has no surviving guest cast members. And we have to get to the Pertwee era before we get to, because sadly we've lost John Pertwee, Caroline John and Nicholas Courtney, before we get to an episode, not a story, an episode that has no surviving cast members at all. Spearhead from Space episodes 3 and 4 have no surviving cast members at all, and there's a couple of, or at least one episode of Ambassadors of Death that also has, I think it's episode 3, that has no surviving cast members. Episodes 1 and 2 still have Ray Armstrong, who plays Grey, and John Lord, who appears in a later episode, one of the middle episodes, and then Geoffrey Beevers, John Levine, etc. in the later episodes. But there's one of the early episodes of Ambassadors of Death that has no surviving cast members at all. And then we get to Deadly Assassin, which has no surviving guest cast by Tom Baker. And then we have the last 2 episodes of Trial of a Time Lord. Now, I think there's cause to actually call Michael Jaston and Linda Bellingham regulars, because they are regulars throughout that season. But either way, with the death of Michael Jaston, there is now no surviving guest cast member of The Ultimate Foe, and it leaves only the Doctor and companion actors, Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant. So there we are. We did, and the other side of that was that I think it was Dragonfire, Frontios, City of Death, and Warriors of the Deep always were quite late ones. In terms of having cast, and Destiny of the Daleks, I think, having a completely surviving guest cast, and I was really on top of this when that was the case, but they've all since, and I mean I'm talking now, I think of it as recently, but probably a good 10 years ago, lost somebody or another. So there are no classic series episodes or stories. There are no classic series stories that have an entirely living cast. So there we go. I hope that was enlightening, but I just wanted to clear that up because I didn't really need to. I don't think I got any complaints, but it's been niggling at me. In fact, it's been niggling at me so much I recorded this once to clear it up. And then went to sleep, and then actually had a dream in which my dream reminded me that Unearthly Child and Aztecs probably also counted, and I dreamt that I'd done this before I actually did it. So see, happy times and places, you even invade my dreams. Right, so let's now get on to people who aren't rubberneckers, but are Doctor Who fans who like saying things. Do we go in order? John Deere does actually point out something that could be I think you'll find a helpful one, because season 15 is a bit weird, the way that we've decided to bunch the stories together, because as John points out, it is a sort of season finale, The Deadly Assassin, because we're heading for the Christmas break, and the Radio Times refers to The Face of Evil as new series, because there is a gap in the transmission of between Deadly Assassin and The Face of Evil. So yeah, therefore its sense of climax is not sort of diluted by the fact that there's a new episode next week. That's a very good point. Nev Fountain says, can't stay away, can I? Ha! Like Daren, I did get the connection between the extra lives shown in The Brain of Morbius and the imposition of the regeneration limit in Deadly Assassin, implying that this Doctor is the last Doctor. Unlike Daren, I assumed it was a typical Robert Holmes in-joke, suggesting that the show had had a charmed life and it was only a matter of time before the BBC axe fell. I don't think it unreasonable, given Holmes' intention to scare the little buggers to death, i.e. children, that he might think the Hinchliffe-Holmes approach would lead to Tom Baker being the last Doctor. As always, writers' intentions don't always have their intended consequences. It's ironic that Holmes' aim in Morbius Assassin to limit the Doctor's life has become a pretext to do the opposite and give him an infinite lifespan. Guy Lambert says, oh God, every time I hear The Timeless Child, it reminds me of when non-fans friends say to me, what's all this about the old bloke not being the first Doctor? And I curse the show for lumbering me with having to respond. A guy also says, I forgot to say how much I enjoyed these episodes, especially you reading out people's thoughts. That's so fun. Well, that's why it's because of you, Guy, I'm adding these thoughts now, because the opportunity has presented itself. Lisa and Andrew, the lovely Lisa and Andrew, say, Wednesday, 6th of April 1977, saw Peter Pratt team up with Patrick Fife and George Logan on Radio 4 to take part in the Stackton Music Festival as part of the enchanting world of Hinge and Bracket. How marvellous. David Tranier, that was fun. Toby, thank you. I do hope that a moon balloon profile of Bob Holmes is coming to a Blu-ray soon, and I'll be looking out for the Barusa blinks next time. I'd love to do something on Bob Holmes. I mean, they did do one in the early days of the range, and it was a good documentary, and has plenty of people on it, many of whom are no longer with us. But I would like to delve a little bit deeper. I mean, I don't think he has any surviving family now, but he's definitely an important figure. Unfortunately, because Holmes and Douglas Camfield are both very important figures, they got dealt with early on in the range when perhaps budgets and what was deemed possible were not as extensive as they are now. But it means that then to go back would see, could we justify another Bob Holmes documentary? I'd love to do one, because he's my favourite classic series writer. Oh, it's hard. Nick Mellish says, I'd never clicked the universal use of shimmering makeup before. Shiny, happy people indeed. I know, yeah, it's there. I'd noticed it, but I'd not really thought about it. It's obviously a much more important element of the story for some, which is interesting. The Deadly Assassin, says David Gillespie Pratt, it's a blinking good story, and the blinking has very much become a talking point. Great set of podcasts, says Anthony Carroll. We'll drag out the Blu-ray later to look at Blinking Barusa. Sad, one of the stories, no guest cast still around. Well, that's a cheery note anyway. Well, look, let's have the cheery note that I've added the audience feedback from Patreon, which is just one of the advantages. Why not turn it into a plug, Toby? Because I always leave the plugs till the post-credits bit, and I'm sure lots of people turn off during the credits because those are the times we live in. So yeah, one of the advantages of being on Patreon is that you get to send some feedback, and it's a lovely place. As you can hear, nobody's having rows or anything like that. It's a benign place, and people send nice feedback, and it's just lovely to hear from people. And I wasn't sure if people wanted the feedback and stuff read out, but everyone seems to have quite enjoyed it, giving different perspectives. And of course, people come with their own facts or reminders or lovely nuggets of trivia, and that's all part of the fun of it. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and that having the Deadly Assassin in our sights has been a mutually beneficial experience. So I think you'll find it's time for me to stop talking now, and so I will. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydoke, and my special guest, Daren Thomas. I'm grateful to Daren and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Keith Say, Graham Slate, David Shepherdson, Stephen, in small case no surname Stephen, Neil Tate, Nick Temple, Damien Timmer, Sabrina Tirabassi, Apollo C. Vermouth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Stephen White, Tom White, Michael Williams, Rhys Williams, Andrew Willis, Andrew Wilson, David James Wilson, Sydney Wilson, Frank Shales, Risto Matti Cirillo, Barry Platt, Adam Parker, Graham Knott, Kevin Murdoch, Rick Moran, Roland Moore, Nathan Martin, Philip Marsh, Ian K. McLachlan, Joe Llewellyn, Ashley Knight, Ian Key, Chris Hyam, Paul Harris, Siobhan Galichon, Jason Gorman, Susie Ferguson, Paul Cook, Nigel Brumley and Tim Harding. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to become a patron, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/Toby Haydoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you get all sorts of extra goodies, advanced releases of all the podcasts, bonus exclusive monthly AMAs and looks behind the scenes at the DVD and Blu-ray extras that I make, interviews as well, all sorts of goodies. And the tiers, as I say, are for as little as £3 per month, but they go up all the way to as gazillion. And you can get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in one go. If you'd rather avoid the Patreon way of doing things, you can do a one-off contribution anytime you like at ko-fi.com/Toby Haydoke, and you can support with no financial outlay at all, and that's perfectly understandable. I'm just grateful to you for listening. If you go to any of the places that these podcasts are available, for example, where you're listening now, and like, subscribe, give 5-star ratings and a few lines of review, that all really helps, especially if you're enjoying this on YouTube, which is a new mode of distribution for me right now. So anything to get those sort of numbers and thumbs up just helps it look like I'm not Billy No Mates. Of course, in real life, I'm Billy No Mates, which is why I spend my entire time trying to seek the approval of strangers on social media. I have 2 Twitter accounts. One is for Haydoke Podcasts, which is everything about these podcasts, and one is me, so it's about more than just Doctor Who, but about the comedy and the acting and the writing and all sorts of other things that I do, and that's at Toby Haydoke. I'm on Instagram too. I've even worked out how to make videos at toby.haydoke, and there's a Facebook page as well where these podcasts appear, and so do any information about television appearances and Blu-ray extras and all sorts of other bits and bobs. So you can, I think, do you like there, or you do something, you touch me there. No, don't touch me. Yeah, no, don't touch me there. Don't touch me there. And there we have it. Well, look, it's my partner's birthday next week, and I'm putting together a video of people wishing her a happy birthday. And I've bitten off more than that. It's going to be a movie, and so I shouldn't really be doing this now, but she's snuck off, and so I've used it as the opportunity to do my this latest edition of Happy Times and Places. But I've got to get my nose back to the grindstone of video editing people wishing her a happy birthday, because what do you get the woman who doesn't really want anything because she's not very acquisitive and can't eat most things because she's got food allergies and health issues, so I can't buy her nice chocolates or things like that. Clothes? No way, I'm not going to get those, am I? She's got a perfume that she does. Jewelry, again, not really. So she apparently doesn't want any classic series Blu-rays. So I've had to think of something else. So I've done her a video, which I'm off to edit now. Hence this rather truncated post-credits bit, but that's not part of the deal anyway. And also, this is an hour and 20-minute long podcast on a 24-minute episode of Doctor Who. So, strictly speaking, there's an hour of this that is entirely surplus to requirements. So we don't need any more surplus. I was just going to delete the part of the track that had the original I Think You'll Find on it, and I couldn't do it. I'm a Doctor Who fan. I don't want to de-accession and junk something. So what better use of the post credits bit? And it's appropriate to The Deadly Assassin, which of course lost the end of an episode in an edit for the purposes of taste and violence. That's not what this edit was made for, and has had to have it restored, even though it only now exists in a poorer quality version. So it's entirely appropriate to The Deadly Assassin that instead of junking the original I Think You'll Find, I've popped it at the end here because I don't want to destroy it. History would never forgive me. So those who are so inclined to hear it in all its bad quality, the glory. So there we go. But, never throw anything away.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
I don't think I need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, sneaking into a corner of my house just before uploading the final version of this podcast, because I got into a slight muddle. I just basically didn't want to invoke Tom Baker's mortality, so I was concentrating more on not doing that than phrasing the correct nature of surviving guest cast or not. So The Deadly Assassin has an entirely deceased guest cast, but a surviving Doctor. There is also Planet of Giants and Power of the Daleks, which have an entirely deceased guest cast at the time of recording. But Planet of Giants, of course, has a surviving regular, Carol Ann Ford, and Power of the Daleks has a surviving regular, Annika Wills. The Aztecs possibly has an entirely deceased guest cast, but we don't know the fates and or whereabouts of David Anderson. Don't go with what it says on IMDb or that issue of Doctor Who magazine recently. I think it was a Fact or Fiction a couple of years ago. They're wrong. They've muddled him up with a different Dave. Well, with a Dave Anderson, so it's not the same person immediately. But anyway, let's not get into that. That's fight for another day. And so the Aztecs is possible to have an entirely deceased guest cast. But again, it has a surviving regular, Carol Ann Ford. So yes, I was right in what I said. The Deadly Assassin is the only story to have an entirely deceased guest cast, but a surviving Doctor. But I'm just heading off. Inevitable, I think you'll find, because I've got loads of other things to do tonight, and it was niggling me, so I thought I'd do this instead. Anyway, there we go. What a joyous set of facts that was.